I feel like since the inception of the medium back in 1995, 3D animation has had a clear trajectory in ways other forms of animation have not. If you take a look at Pixar's catalog, you'll see the way those films pushed boundaries was through consistently achieving a higher level of photorealism and greater functionality with their software. The technology used for the first Toy Story was very bare bones, capable of rendering plastic figurines well enough, but living people kind of looked nightmarish, to say the least. Just a few years down the road, however, we had Monsters Inc., and suddenly we saw hair in particle simulations, subsurface scattering, and the models captured a greater degree of expression and could exaggerate in ways that weren't possible before. Fast forward to Toy Story 4, and every frame is a perfect mimic of live-action cinematography, stacked with dynamic lighting and materials so high-res they'll fry your computer's GPU if you just look at them for too long. In comparison, in the realm of 2D animation, a clear progression of technology has seemingly not dictated how the films have looked. While there are some movies, like Klaus for example, that took advantage of how much 2D animation software can achieve nowadays, for the most part your modern 2D film absolutely looks like it could have been made in the 2000s. Films like The Iron Giant or Treasure Planet have aged very gracefully. Compare them to the 3D films that came out in the same years and it's a very different story. I think this illustrates the journey of 3D animation as a whole. While they certainly contained an immense variety of creative designs and stories, for the most part we didn't see a lot of stylistic exploration in how they were rendered, because Pixar invented the 3D animation look and everybody has been trying to look like Pixar. And eventually this became kind of a problem. The degree to which animation software could achieve photorealism outgrew the cartoon designs they were built for. Take for example what I think is Pixar's weakest movie, The Good Dinosaur. The film's environments and scenery look like they were straight up pulled from a National Geographic documentary, but then the characters just looked like this? The combination of those two things made the film visually awkward and uncanny. I think The Good Dinosaur was an early sign of the problems that would soon arrive. In the present day, I think we've hit a wall with what 3D cartoons can achieve with photorealistic rendering. Cartoonish character designs with lifelike textures placed in realistic environments has become an unfortunate pairing that has marred quite a few films. Sorry for the dramatic language, but you can't convince me that Lightyear doesn't look weird, okay? It's just kind of awkward to have this hyper-realistic world inhabited by a guy with a giant bulbous head. He no longer looks like a cute cartoon guy like he used to, but like a real person with a major facial deformity or something. I don't think it's too much of a surprise then that we've started to see a plethora of projects utilize 3D animation in ways that are stylistically bold and fresh. I feel like it all really started with Into the Spider-Verse, which was 3D animation meant to look like a 2D comic brought to life. Arcane is 3D, but is rendered to look like it was entirely matte painted. The new Puss in Boots movie is also playing around with a more painterly style. Even the recent Pixar films, Turning Red and Luca, have abandoned Pixar's tried and true look in favor of something more visually experimental and handcrafted. And this is where the Wingfeather Saga comes in. Based on the novels by Andrew Peterson and streaming straight to YouTube, the Wingfeather Saga is a new 3D animated cartoon series that I believe is worth watching, if simply on the basis that I appreciate its experimental direction. Because I've never read the books, I'm not really familiar with what the story is all about, but from what I've gathered so far, it takes place in a fantasy world largely inspired by Nordic culture. It feels aesthetically similar to stuff like How to Train Your Dragon. There's dragons and stuff, I don't know. There's a few things I think that make it really special. The first being that it's the largest crowd-funded animated show ever. But most significantly for this video, the show's animation is really interesting. It's neither strictly 2D or 3D, but incorporates both. The backgrounds and many of the set pieces are flat matte paintings, while the main characters are 3D models rendered to look painted like the scenery around them. It makes for a look that is somewhere between professional and homemade. I think the use of 3D models has a lot of advantages and benefits. First, and maybe most significantly, being that the burden of having to animate each character from scratch with every frame is non-existent when using 3D models, which shortens production time significantly. And for what is a relatively small team making a season's worth of 20-minute long episodes, 3D animation was kind of a necessity. The interesting thing here is that the animation was supposedly made entirely in Unreal Engine, which is kind of wild to me because I've never thought of Unreal as being able to produce anything other than video games. For me, the most good Unreal was ever for was making those PS5 tech demos and those hyper-realistic 4K gameplay videos of Mario and Zelda running around the grassy field. You know what videos I'm talking about. Anyway, another benefit is the fact that 3D models allow the animators to easily capture interesting compositions that would be difficult with purely 2D characters. However, there definitely are some drawbacks to using 3D models and the particular rendering style they've chosen. In this case, while the 3D models allow for a sustainable long-term production, they are kind of limited. Nowadays, 3D animation is pretty expressive, but since this project is using Unreal, you can tell the models can only exaggerate so much before they would break, which sometimes gives the characters a kind of stiff look. That being said, sometimes the rigid look in combination with the intentional shifting of the textures and the low frame rate makes for something that I think is pretty pleasant and unique. Again, it has a nice polished homemade vibe despite being TV level quality. And those are all my comments and criticisms on the visual language of the Wingfeather Saga. There's certainly more to talk about with the show, especially concerning the writing, but since I've never read the books, I really can't comment on that. I know a lot of people were mad in chat because the story was changed in some parts from the book, but honestly that's kind of a ridiculous criticism because no story is going to translate from a novel to an episodic TV show perfectly, right? Anyway, I'll keep watching the Wingfeather Saga. I'm pretty excited to see where it goes. Also, some of my close friends were on the animation team for it, which is why I know about the show in the first place. So that's pretty cool. Anyway, see ya.